Come, spell weavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome to Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, your RPG treasure trove. I'm your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and I am back. Just to let you guys know what ended up happening with the last interview that we were supposed to have, Dave had a little bit of technical issues, and I had COVID, so that's why that didn't ultimately end up going through. But we're back now. I'm fine. Everyone in my house is fine. And I'm excited tonight to kick off 2022 with a guy who's had a lot of super interesting things to say recently. He's done a lot of great live streams, and he's, friends with a bunch of people that I really respect and enjoy in this hobby. He's been a fan of the show for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for DM Bloodworth.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Ryan, for the invite.
Absolutely. I remember when you added me on Facebook and stuff. I didn't at that point know who you were, and then I found your content, and I was like, "Oh wait, I think I know this guy. I think I've seen this guy's stuff." And at that point, I was like, "All right, let's bring him on the show. I need to talk to DM Bloodworth."
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, this is my first interview, so I've been on the the other side, and I haven't done that many interviews to begin with, anyway. So for me, it was really a surprise for someone to say, "Listen, I'd like for you to come on the show, and talk about tabletop role playing games." So I was really excited, looking forward to it, and just ready to roll.
Absolutely. So we're going to start here at the beginning, where we start with everyone. I like to ask a lot of the same questions to people who come on the show. So DM Bloodworth, how did you get into role-playing games?
My introduction to role-playing games was in either 1977 or 78. So that would have made me around 10, 11 years old. Mm-hmm. My first dungeon master was Shayana, and he was he was a good friend of mine from elementary school, obviously. And one day he asked myself and our friend Adam and Stephen to come over his house. And so this is on Suffolk County, Long Island, so Long Island, New York. And back then, young kids, we walked several miles to his house, and he introduced us to a role-playing game. It was the first time that I ever seen one. I vividly remember the graph paper and those dice that you had to fill in with the crayon, just to be able to read the numbers. And although I vaguely remember my first character, I knew my first character was a fighter, obviously a human fighter. And I was never quite sure whether it was the Holmes edition or the Moldvay edition, but Moldvay was the first box set that I owned. So that was the first RPG that I actually bought for myself. And we played almost every day. And then that carried us through, even through high school. We played 6 days a week. And mixed in a few games here and there, but for the most part, it was Dungeons and Dragons, and then Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Gotcha. Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this question or not, and if you don't, it's fine. But one thing that always fascinates me, people who got into the hobby super, super early on, at 77, 78, just a few years into the existence of D&D as a whole. Do you know how your first DM found out about the game, got into it, all that stuff? Do you know kind of how he found the hobby?
I'm not quite sure how, I don't know how he found it. He lived closest to the hobby shop,
Mm-hmm.
and that the hobby shop was the source for all of our materials from then on. And this was before, I think this was really before the hobby shop was even set up for gameplay. Like, you didn't go to the hobby shop to play. You just went there to buy the books, and then you went home, or we went to the public library and played at the public library. But for the most part, we played in our homes, like our three homes that we where we alternated DMing. So yeah, so I don't know quite sure how he picked it up. I'm still Facebook friends with him, so I can always ask him, even though I haven't brought up Dungeons and Dragons with him in ages. But I could always shoot him a Facebook PM and find out what his what brought him to the game first.
Gotcha. Now, of all the game systems that you played, and I think a lot of people who come on here who are, from the OSR have a very similar answer to this question, but of all the game systems that you've played in the entire time that you've been a gamer, what would you say your favorite is?
Well, I have different favorites based on the genre. So obviously, high fantasy is going to be Dungeons and Dragons, and my favorite of those is Advanced First Edition. And I know a lot of times people say, well, that's the, it's very disorganized and it's crunchy, and there's a lot of things that don't make sense. I mean, as a 13, 14-year-old playing it, I never had a problem with that. So of high fantasy role playing, that's my favorite. Of more historical, military obviously would be Twilight 2000 first edition. Horror is Call of Cthulhu, either second or third edition. I don't know which one it was that we played first, but third edition was the one that I had. Anything Conan, I loved. I loved TSR's Conan. I loved, I loved Modiphius's Conan. So I never played the Mongoose ones in between. So anything Conan, I've always loved. Favorite character, favorite author, So I knew I was going to bring that up with you, but that's another thing. So yeah, anything that I connected to the literature that I was reading at the time, was also something that I really jumped into. If there was I didn't know of Traveler back then, but Traveler just strikes me as being very Arthur C. Clarke kind of, space opera and just, very gritty, realistic, type of gameplay. So I would have really enjoyed that. The only RPG that I didn't like back then, and it just didn't strike me right, was I didn't like Heroes. I really couldn't grasp onto that, or Champions for that matter. I was strictly a Villains and Vigilantes, second edition, player for that particular genre. So yeah, it really depends on the genre, and I have a favorite one of each of those.
Gotcha. Yeah. I do find it interesting, and this is a lesson that I think the RPG market has taught people over and over and over again. It is very hard to take one particular system and make it fit every possible iteration of a genre. Even, I love Savage Worlds with all my heart. It's a great setting or system. It's it's setting agnostic, so you can run multiple types of games with it, I don't see it as doing fantasy all that well. When it comes to fantasy, I'm always going to grab, at this point, Dungeon Crawl Classics or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Um, so it's interesting that we find that, you know, certain games are better off if they just kind of focus on, we want to target this particular feel or this particular genre of you know, storytelling or play, or, you know, however you want to put it, rather than trying to broadly focus, or even worse, like they did with the D20 system, and like some people are trying to do with 5e right now, just beat the genre into that square peg, or into
Mm-hmm.
that square hole,
Right.
uh, just to use the system that they think is best for everything.
Yeah, I think it's very, very difficult to make a system that is that is very easy to move from one genre to the next. Um, I guess GURPS does a pretty decent job, but that's a very simplistic system, and it's obviously skills based. You know, 5e I think is hard to do. I've
Mhm.
tried some sci-fi based 5e, and I don't think it really works that well with that kind of a game engine to it. You know, if you
Mhm.
want to call it a game engine, but yeah, but for the most part, I agree with you. It's like I think certain games are very genre specific, or vice versa.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so next up on my list of questions that everyone gets asked, and this is a two-parter, as you know, we all like to, you know, develop our own particular styles when we play games, both as game masters and as players. So if you had to describe your play style as a game master and as a player, how would you describe that?
Well, I'll start with player first because that's kind of easier. I tend to play characters that are, very different than myself, um, and they tend to be chaotic neutral. If I'm playing a game that has alignment system, or I certainly play them that way, even if it doesn't have an alignment system. So and a very Conan the Barbarian kind of
Hmm.
approach to uh, very practical and self-centered, and as far as goals are concerned, and very easily very loyal, but also easy to tip over into vengeance real quick. And it's
Hmm.
I've taken that kind of character play and I carry it into especially computer gaming. I'm like a maniac in MMOs and things like that. It's like very protective of my guilds or my alliances. Like I'm playing Starfleet Command battles. Is it the
Hmm.
and just today actually, because I'm in a fairly large group, and someone attacked my mining ship and destroyed my mining ship when it wasn't, it wasn't over full. That's kind of like a server rule.
Yep.
Don't kill ships um, that are under their cap for capacity.
Hmm.
And so this was a much larger alliance, but I was like, hell no, I got to kill this guy back, And if I can't find him, I'm going to kill one of his allies and then send a PM to both of them to tell them, I'm not one to mess with. I don't care what the cost is, I'm going to retaliate. And so I retaliated. I found him. Luckily, I found him and I killed him instantly. And he was like, "Oh, it was an accident." I was like, "It doesn't matter, you know, doesn't matter. It was an accident." I says,
Hmm.
"Let's just leave it at 1-for-1, and we could both walk away."
Hmm.
And then my own alliance was like, "Well, we really thought that this could have been handled differently." I was like, "Not for me, you know, not for me." There was, eye for an eye, I don't care. Well, we tried to play within the rules, and you kind of broke the rules by taking him when he wasn't overcast. I was like, doesn't matter. It's like,
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. I says, I bet you he won't touch my ships again. I says, and that's the only message that I wanted to send, was that you will pay for that action. And so I play my tabletop role-playing characters very similar to that way. I'm a long time EVE Online player. I played that for 12 years. All right. So I can fit into that kind of a MMO mentality very easily, and including on tabletop. So that's, I think, one half of your question. The other half, DMing. So I would say that in my current campaign right now, I think that I have finally struck what I consider to be my best DMing, of my, 30 years of DMing. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I have great players. Now, I have a very large group of players. I have 9 players in my AD&D first edition campaign, and we're going into our 24th week, and they hate missing a week, and we haven't yet, and I hate missing a week. And again, it's like we're as soon as we're done with the session, we're looking for the next session. And I think what I struck upon that was that I'm leaving it much more open-ended, so that when they make a decision to do something, I kind of roll with it, and then I try to build the consequences up around it. Plus there's the campaign, the underlying theme that still continues along its timeline, whether they engage with it or not. All right. And then I make sure that I include, as often as possible, the 3 pillars of tabletop role playing. So there is always going to be some kind of lore or story behind it that they're learning about the world. So that's the exploration pillar. There's usually going to be some kind of a combat engagement, but not always. And then there's always some kind of an interaction, whether it's amongst themselves or with NPCs. And I found that by making sure I hit all 3 of those things, by giving each of the 9 players moments where they're kind of the focus of what's going on, and by talking with them, before these sessions really began, and when we started planning out and kind of thinking, how long might this campaign last? And when I kind of did like a rough calculation in my head, plotting out how long it took them to get from first to second level, and I started projecting and plotting that out, I was like, by my calculations, it should take us about 2 years and 11 months to get you to where I think this campaign might come to an end. And not a single one of them balked at the idea. There was buy-in right from like the 3rd week in to having something that would last 2 years and 11 months or 3 years. And that had me just totally dedicated to, running this campaign. And like I said, I think it's been my best experience as a dungeon master, with a phenomenal group of players.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been dungeon mastering?
Well, I dungeon mastered in and out between 77 and around 88, 89, so about 11 years there. Then I had a long hiatus away from tabletop role playing. I followed like all the rest of the players in the 80s, or a lot of the kids in the 80s. I started playing PlayStation and computer RPGs, and then I spent 8 years in the military. And I know I hear a lot of people talking about, oh, well, when I was in the military, we were still playing role playing. Not my experience at all.
Hmm.
I guess I was surrounded by, um, I think it was because I was in a headquarters company at the brigade level.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the people that I was associated with were older than I was. I mean, I probably had more Vietnam veterans as my fellow soldiers, and they were always much higher ranking than I was too. It's like I was at one point the only private in the G4 section,
Mm-hmm.
of the unit, which is the logistics section of the unit. And most of my unit was a military police unit. So, I mean, virtually everybody on the outside were police officers. It just wasn't there was
Mm-hmm.
no indication of playing role playing games, in that unit. So I never had that experience. So for that 8 years or so, no real connection. We played plenty of, PlayStation sports games and stuff like that, but nothing along the tabletop role playing. And then I continued doing computer RPGs. I did not get back into tabletop again until 2015.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then I picked up DMing right from there,
Gotcha.
or GMing. Yeah, right from there.
So cumulatively, you'd be looking at 17, 18 years of
Yeah.
GMing,
Yeah.
probably.
Yes.
All right. So for all of you GMs who are just now starting out, DM Bloodworth, it took him uh, longer than that, but 17 years of GMing to stumble upon what he thinks is his best GMing, and I imagine a few years from now, the next campaign that you're running, you're gonna say, "No, this is my best GMing." So yes, your best GMing is always ahead of you. Just
Yes.
everyone keep that in mind. If you think you're a terrible GM now, everyone does at one point or another, and your best GMing is yet to come. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, and it's almost like that unintended thing too. It just happens.
Yep.
I mean, I'm a teacher by trade, and I've had some difficult students that I was able to just have eating out of the palm of my hand. All right. And this is middle school age kids, and just, right here. And people will say, well, how'd you turn that kid around? I have no idea. That's what I tell them. I said, honestly, to tell you the truth, I have no idea. I said, it's just at the right moment, I gave that kid exactly what he or she needed to hear. And then from that moment on, the relationship was always really, really good rapport going, from that point on. And for a long time, I've had, I was the kind of person that they would say, talk to this kid or talk to that kid, and just try to get them into the thing. And it didn't always work. Like I said, it's like it wasn't something that I could just, like, oh, here's my notes. This is exactly what I did with Billy, and so now this is going to work with Sharon. No, it was never like that. It was always by surprise. And if you're DMing and you just change up your group a little bit, you might have a completely different experience. All right. And the same thing won't always work. So always be ready to, make some changes. If you see something isn't working, try something new. And, once it works with you, stay with it, stay with that particular group, let it work out. And then, try something different with a different group of people. Don't always try to duplicate it, because sometimes it is lightning in a bottle.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always just at the most random moment that stuff like that happens. I was running my Dark Sun game, my 5e Dark Sun game, which in hindsight, 5e Dark Sun was a mistake. But if you want to hear 2 hours of me and some other guys, including Luau Lu and Bill Barsh, talking about Dark Sun in Dungeon Crawl Classics and several other topics, check out This Old Dungeon, Luau Lu's podcast. Just plug for a friend there. But that aside, one of my players said, "Dude, I've been playing D&D for 30 years. You are a great dungeon master. And I was completely taken aback. I was like, I'm what? I've only been doing this for like a few years. What do you... He had so much fun with the game. He said, you are a great dungeon master. And it wasn't a session that I was like, that was a banger. That was the best session we've ever run. It was just a regular session. And he said that to me, and I was completely shocked and floored by it. And now I'm like, yeah, I am a great dungeon master. And I just hold on to that. I hold on to that moment where a player told me that I was great at dungeon mastering.
Yeah. I think another thing, just to add on to it is that, something else I was very conscious with is, number one, I wasn't afraid to tell my players no. All right. So like at the very beginning, they were like, well, can I play a Cavalier? No. All right. I says, I'm sorry, but I just don't like the class. I think it's a broken class. It was a mistake from our Unearthed Arcana. And so I said, no, you can't play that class. I wouldn't let them play barbarians either for two reasons. Number one, another broken class. Very, very powerful in the beginning, but then they're if we're doing a long campaign, they're going to find that they're underpowered, levels 10 plus, and we're looking to go longer than that. So, and I said, plus we're not in the region, we're playing in Greyhawk. I was like, you're nowhere near any of the barbaric lands, and there's, how are you going to get there? I was like, no, I'm not going to, deal with that either. I don't particularly like bards, so it was kind of, I really don't want to. But now my most experienced player, who was actually, a former employee of TSR, and that's old TSR, so 1982 to 1987, he was there, and he said, listen, I really like to play a bard. So I wasn't going to tell him no. Right. I was like, okay, you'll go through the process of, 7 levels of fighter, then he'll have to do 7 levels of thief, and then he'll become a first level bard. So it's like, if you want to dedicate your time to doing that, then fine. But the other thing that I learned to do was to separate the player's knowledge, because all of my players are very experienced. The youngest is in his. Actually, I just picked up a new female player to the group, and I think she's certainly the youngest. But I've played with her now for almost a year, both as a player and as a GM, and so she's going to come up. But the one thing I wanted to do with the players was to separate what their characters would know with what the players know. Mm-hmm. And I think that by saying, well, you know what, your character might know something about this. All right. So think about your character a little bit, and then try to make that connection. So trying to put the players into their characters' minds and what their characters might know, and, always separating the two. And I think that's really important too, because it allows them to become much more immersed as to what's going on, and to think about their characters and just like, well, what kind of talents and knowledge might my character have, as opposed to what I have as a player. And that's really, really important, I think, to just prod out of your players as a DM.
Wait, so DM Bloodworth, you're telling me that there's a female, an actual woman who's enjoying an OSR game? The internet told me that was impossible.
No, I have 2 women in my group. Now, again, it's 9 players, so 2 are women and 7 are men. So there's no, it's certainly not a 50-50 mix. But when I was playing, all right, with the one of the same women, and my former DM is actually the magic user in my group. When we played, we were 50-50. It was 3 women and 3 guys plus the DM. And at one point it was 4 women and the 3 guys plus the DM. So it was always balanced. Mm-hmm. So it was just luck of the draw, if you want to say it. It was organic. Yeah. It wasn't like we we went out there and saying, oh, no, you can sit, you can't sit, or we really want you because you're, X, Y, or Z, always organic grouping. And that's another thing that I think is very, very important to emphasize. As a DM or a GM, if you want to call it a GM, trying to create a new table, don't worry about who comes to your table other than, are they coming to your table to play the game? That's the only thing I concerned myself with. Are you coming to my table to play the game? All right. And, let the chips fall where they may. If it's 9 white guys, it's 9 white guys. All right. So I will go there. If it's 9 women, it's 9 women. I'll be happy with that too. If it's, this race or that race or this gender or this, orientation, I don't care. Are you sitting at my table ready to play? Yeah. And that's the only thing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that's the only thing anyone should be concerned about. Who wants to play some D&D?
Yep.
So, 2 more of these introductory questions, and then I've got a couple topics for us to dive into here. What would you say is your fondest RPG memory, if you had to pick just one?
As a player, it was when I was playing a half-elf female character, my very first female character, playing a female character, and she actively plotted to have my friend Steve's character killed. All right, so that she could then steal his his belongings, while feigning, first of all, he was an annoying character. He was really annoying. He was almost like the Leroy Jenkins of the group, just that it was 30 years before Leroy Jenkins.
Yep.
All right. And so it was like, oh, this guy is such a pain in the neck. So I was like, the next time he goes into a room that I have scouted out and I knew was basically a place that I didn't want to go into. And so he did. He ran right into there, and I slowly closed the door and I iron spiked it shut and then just walked away. All right. And then when we found his body later on, it was like, oh, I don't know how this happened. It was like, oh my gosh, he's been killed. So I was like, I feel so bad because I scouted out this room and I just didn't realize that it had anything in it, and so I paid the 500 gold pieces to put him into a mausoleum with all of his belongings. That way I could go in there and steal all of his belongings and sell them for, I think I made like a 1,500 gold piece profit of
nice.
it. And my DM was like, you're not chaotic neutral. He says, that's the most chaotic evil thing, we had. And this was as like 12 or 13-year-olds, and we just had that whole concept of how alignment is really supposed to work, and and just we had no problem with PvP, and we never did in our games. So it's like no one ever really crossed that line again, because it kind of sent the message.
Yeah.
My friend Steve didn't care. He was like, wow, that was a really cool story. He says, I can't believe you and the DM were in on this, the whole time, and knew that this was going to go down. And I was like, yeah, I mean, just don't play your character like that anymore. And I won't have a problem. Now, when we played Twilight 2000, we were like, the frag is coming. The frag is coming. Make sure you don't get, you don't frag the lieutenant, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, that was, as a player, that was my, most favorite moment. As a DM, my most favorite moment was when the player characters grew attached to a former slave. He was an escaped slave, and this is in a fantasy role-playing game setting, and they just attached to him. He became almost like a Gunga Din to them. All right, without them being old enough to even know what Gunga Din's story was. So he was like their guide. And they were not supposed to care about him because he was, formerly a thrall, and they were not supposed to this was in a very Nordic setting,
yeah.
And they were not supposed to grow this attachment with him, but they did. And then when he got killed, their level of vengeance was amazing to me. I was like, wow, I mean, these guys are going to go all out. And now I have to start creating this thing because it was on the fly. Didn't know that they were going to go that direction with it. And, had to create a whole scenario around that point. And that was the first time that I really understood how an NPC, like players could get attached to an NPC very quickly, and how they'll treat an NPC as part of their own group, even though it wasn't designed that way. And so that's, and I just recently had that same realization with my AD&D group last week. One of their henchmen was killed, and and they had the same kind of impact. It was like, oh geez, it's really, we're responsible for this because we should have been looking out after him, kind of situation. And so it's just anytime that you get your players to attach to an NPC, I think is a great moment as a dungeon master, because that means that you breathe life into that character to the point that the players actually cared about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got one last introductory question here. This is one that a lot of people take some time to come up with an answer for, or maybe have an answer off the top of their head. The answer to this question can be as philosophical or as sophomoric as you want it to be. But DM Bloodworth, if you could put anything on a t-shirt, with the exception of your logos that you use in your content, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I could go very cliche and just say dad, but I mean, game related, I would just say, I mean, there's so many that are just out there that are, you could buy off the rack kind of thing. T-shirt question. I thought a little bit about this because I watched some of your previous streams, and I couldn't think of it then. And, I mean, the dice decides, I mean, yeah, I just don't have a great question, great answer for that question. I mean, I do believe that the dice do decide, and that kind of shields you from player angst. But yeah, I just don't have a good question, answer for that. At least not now. Sorry about that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if something occurs to you before we
if something comes to me, maybe something will spring to mind.
Yeah, just let me know, and even if I'm in the middle of a sentence, you can shout it out.
Yeah.
All right, so with the initial questions out of the way, one of the big things that I really wanted to talk with you about, because this involves one of your most recent live streams, this odd notion that some of the Twitter warriors have come to, that if you're a fan of RPGs, that necessarily means you have to or should support Wizards of the Coast directly, buy their stuff, and play 5e, otherwise you're not really a fan. Where did you first encounter this, and what are kind of your thoughts just at that as a whole?
Well, I think the first time I came across this, real anti-OSR thing that was on Twitter, and the person basically came out and was saying something along the lines of that, the OSR is a detriment to the hobby. The OSR is kind of couched or it's based on old, racist, misogynistic, all of the isms that you can think of was, and that's where the OSR comes from. And, forgetting the fact that, Wizards of the Coast created the OSR. I mean, they created the OGL, which is really what opened the door for the OSR, and I'm sure some people will argue, no, that's not true. That's not the historical, line of it. I've made the mistake of saying it was a result of 4E and maybe it was 3E or whatever. But, that aside, not knowing the exact timeline of it, it's just an attack against something that I felt that, at least from the people on Twitter, and I think most of the people that attack the hobby on Twitter don't actually play role-playing games. They're role-playing adjacent. They see that, oh, it's really cool to talk about Dungeons and Dragons now, but, they don't actually play the games, or they certainly don't play Dungeons and Dragons. And that was from the Orcs Are Racist guy, who actually came out after getting slammed in the comments, and says, well, D&D isn't even the game that I play. It's like, all right, then why are you talking about orcs? It's because he just saw the opportunity to latch on to something. Those clowns, and I will say they're clowns, that came out against Oriental Adventures. I wanted to stick pins in my eyes, and ears after listening to some of their stream about it, but they didn't get past the first 3 pages of the book, and they skipped over the parts of Oriental Adventures that actually explained, no, we actually had, Asian playtesters. A dozen of them or so, and, this was never meant to be a historical, depiction of any one particular Asian culture. This was a compilation of several different legends and mythologies all crammed into one to try to capture that 80s martial arts movie feel.
Yeah.
All right. And that was the whole intention of it. And they didn't even address it. So this is, again, like that kind of Twitter adjacent, don't really play the games, don't really read, what was the intent behind creating the games, attacking something because they can't control it. And I think that's the primary thing.
Yeah.
They were able to infiltrate and control Wizards of the Coast because it is one company with one game. All right. If they tried to do the same thing with Magic the Gathering to the same extent, Hasbro would shut it down. Hasbro would not allow that property to get damaged. All right, because that property is probably about 70% of all of their profit.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
5th edition is possibly 10% of their revenue. All right. And actually, when I was thinking about some of the numbers that I've seen come over the last 6 months, I think it's probably closer to 7 or 8% of their total revenue. All right. So it's not a huge property. And, I've always said that Hasbro would shelf it rather than let it taint Magic the Gathering. All right. But that's a side issue. Now, when I had that conversation with J. Scott Garibay. I'll say his name, and I enjoy listening to him, and I enjoy talking to him. And even though we come from total opposite views of what Dungeons and Dragons is, and the role between fifth edition, which he is a beyond just a supporter of it, and the OSR, where I'm probably beyond just a supporter of it as well. The way that he looks at the game and the way that I look at the game is he doesn't see it as a game. All right. And I do. All right. I think Dungeons and Dragons is a game. I think that Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson created a game. I don't give credit to just one, or the other. I think that, it's necessary that both were involved. Gary might have taken it and, marketed it and packaged it and, sold it and mainstreamed it, but he wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for Dave Arneson's ideas. All right. Dave Arneson is the founder of Tabletop role playing. And Gary Gygax is the founder of Dungeons and Dragons. All right. Neither goes anywhere without the other.
Right.
All right. And that's something that I certainly disagree with Jay Scott, is that, he believes that Gary Gygax is the only one, that carried the hobby through. The other difference is that I don't care that Wizards of the Coast sells the most. I mean, and I use the analogy, and he's never actually addressed the analogy because I think it holds too true. McDonald's sells more hamburgers than anybody else. If I put 5 hamburgers in front of you, McDonald's would not be the first one that you grab.
No, not at all.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it still sells more than everybody else. Selling more doesn't mean that there's quality there. It just means that it's easily accessible. It's the one that everybody's heard of. And that's why it sells more. But if given the opportunity to eat a different hamburger, you're going to go to that different hamburger every time. All right. I don't know anybody who considers McDonald's hamburger, the best hamburger that's out there. They might have the best fries, but certainly not the best hamburger.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. I'm a beer drinker. I love my beer. I don't like Bud Light or Budweiser. I drink a lot of craft beer. I drink a lot of beer that's made in the Carolinas and Tennessee and Georgia, because that's the area that I'm in, and I love my craft beer. Does Anheuser-Busch sell more beer than all those breweries put together? Yeah, absolutely. But I'll take my OSR craft brews over Watsy's Budweiser any day of the week. I like the flavor better, and that's what it comes down to. Yeah. If you like the flavor of the 5th edition stuff best, cool, buy it. But if someone else doesn't, just because you're both eating hamburgers, you're both drinking beer, you're both playing role-playing games, you don't have to buy the same brands just because one's more popular than the other. That's completely ridiculous.
Yeah. And there's the t-shirt logo. OSR, less filling, better taste.
Yeah, great taste. I like it.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's confusing quantity for quality. And I think that's where, and I said during that conversation with him, was that you see more innovation coming out of the OSR, of course, because you have so many different creators. Yeah. The OSR is more populist in the sense that it's not politically more populist, but I just mean more populist in that it's an open door for anybody to go in there. Now, does that mean that out of 1,000 games, 900 suck? Probably. All right, but those 100 are going to introduce something that you haven't seen before. All right, and the only real claim to fame that I think that Dungeons and Dragons, beyond its title, behind beyond its label, is the advantage system. And I don't even think that that was the originator of the advantage system. All right, but playing with advantage or disadvantage is a great dynamic. It really does add an element of excitement about it. So that's it's very similar to exploding dice, which I've seen in other, role playing, RPGs, OSR RPGs use exploding dice. One of my favorite mechanics that I've seen, which is brutal as all hell as you can get, is Venture Satanis's Crimson Escalation.
Oh yeah.
All right, where it's like, yeah, a 20, the first round, a 20 is what you need to roll in order to get a critical score. In the second round, a 19 or 20,
Yeah.
then an 18 through 20, and so on until you get down to like a 10 and above. In I guess the 11th round, so the 11th hour is 50% of all attacks, and that means for both monsters and players, are critical hits. It becomes a real, devastating, carnage kind of a game mechanic. Great for a one-shot play session, because you will just go through characters like that too, and that's what it's really designed to be. It's designed like a grindhouse kind of thing. So I think that that's where the OSR really shines in comparison to. So when people argue, well, you got to play the most popular game, and you have to play, they're the only game in town. To me, that's just limiting yourself. Back when we first started talking, we were talking about, our experiences with different genres and everything. I have a niece who only plays fifth edition. All right. And never even thought about it. She's college age. Actually, she graduated from college. So none of her friends ever played anything but fifth edition. I think so many modern players only play one game from one company that they're really limiting their exposure to the hobby. They're really they're hobbling themselves,
Yeah.
and not allowing themselves to grow. And you don't have that problem in OSR. And most players I've found in OSR, and certainly most DMs in the OSR, are people who have played multiple different types of games for a longer period of time than, the OSR is not just a fad. All right. You don't find any fad games there. You don't find any, everything has some longevity to it. I mean, even like DCC or games like that have been around for a while now, and they haven't faded. So that's where I go with that answer.
Yeah. Absolutely. There definitely is, and I noticed this too because I had this was my experience too. I started with 5e, and for 3 years I only played 5e. That was the only system that I played. It wasn't until very recently that I picked up Savage Worlds, picked up DCC, MCC. I tried BX for the first time. I played Swords and Wizardry. In the past 3 years, actually, I'll even narrow it further than that. The past year and a half, I have diversified my gaming a lot more. And it has only made the gaming experience for every other game that I've played, 5e included, because I play a lot of 5e. It's made everything better. Mm-hmm. Seeing what other games do and taking ideas from those things. RPGs, and I'm gonna use a Stu Horvath quote here because he said it best. From the dawn of RPGs, in the beginning, Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax released Dungeons and Dragons, and it was broken. And from that, an entire industry was born. Mm-hmm. the first major publication that was released was broken, and a whole cottage industry popped up around, here's how we would fix these certain things. That's the RPG world was never meant for there to just be one giant ruling over everything.
Mm-hmm.
You need those other games to make your game better, or to make your gaming experience better, and to find new ideas. So
Yeah.
a lot of this is wrapped up in it's a couple things. One thing that Aaron the Pedantic and I talked about not too terribly long ago was a lot of these people, like you said, don't play games. These are RPG dilettantes. They're here and they want to talk about it because it's the thing to talk about on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
But once this bubble bursts, once people stop watching Critical Role, or stop watching other stuff, other popular internet shows, once the celebrities lose interest in it and Stranger Things gets canceled, it's all going to go away. And at that point, those people are going to go away. So listening to them is kind of a silly thing to do, because they're not in it for the long haul.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a major difference. I mean, I've been playing first edition AD&D. I think we first started in 1979. All right. And even though I had that, 17-year hiatus from tabletop role-playing games, it's the game that I've come back to, and I don't know anyone who is seriously saying that, well, I'm going to break away from fifth edition, and 20 years from now, I'm going to come back to fifth edition. There's just no way. I don't believe that would be something that someone would go back to, having experienced, any other new evolution of either Dungeons and Dragons or any other games. In my own experience, I've had very few players actually leave my old school games to go back to fifth edition. I can only think of maybe 2 players in the last 2 years that have said, and that's out of over 30 players, have actually said, I'm going to go back to fifth edition. I just like that better.
Yeah, and there's another issue, and I have not talked about this on the show before, I don't think, but I think this is what kind of powers this whole movement of play 5e or you're not actually a fan. There's a YouTuber named Short Fat Otaku, who I like a lot of his videos, and he put out a video called Consumption as Identity. And you can see this all throughout Twitter. It's everywhere. There are people who, it's not just they are a fan of Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics has been grafted onto their soul in a way, or at least they act like it has. And a lot of them are very insincere in their expressions of fandom, or a lot of them have not really been around the block all that long. They're just here because it's popular, but they act like these specific properties, these specific companies, these brands are there to personally cater to them and personally put out what they want. And if they don't, heaven forbid they don't, they lose their minds because they feel like their very soul is being attacked. And unfortunately, you see this with 5e players sometimes too. Any attack on Wizards of the Coast, and I don't know that Scott is like this personally. He acts like this from what I've seen of him. But, a lot of these people, any attack on 5e is an attack on their game and on them as a gamer. It's the weirdest thing to see people treat these consumer products as, like you said, more than a game, as facets of who they are. But that's kind of the nature of online fandom discourse at this point, and it's really unhealthy. And I think we need to all remind ourselves all of this stuff, it's just movies, it's just comics, and this is just a
Hmm.
game.
Yeah. I often say, you are not your character is not you.
Hmm.
You have to make that separation, otherwise, you get, I mean, you get mazes and monsters.
Yeah.
I mean, look at that. I mean, every person that is even adjacent to the tabletop role playing games should take a look at that movie. All right, and just think about the message of that movie, because for me, and again, I mean, I was a kid when that came out. All right, or a mid teenager when that movie came out. But I look at that was the fuel of the Satanic Panic.
Hmm.
All right, because part of the fear that they generated during that time was not just that, oh, this is satanic rituals and everything like that. It was, your kids are going to lose themselves in this game.
Hmm.
All right, and that's the theme of Mazes and Monsters with Tom Hanks. In case
Yep.
you're not familiar
Oh
with
yeah.
the
Oh yeah. I know
your
that one.
listeners aren't familiar with the movie. um yeah, it's, Tom Hanks, I think, is playing a cleric. It's been ages since I've seen it. He's playing a cleric, and he ends up going into the sewers, and he ends up stabbing somebody because he believed that they were some kind of an apparition or a monster or something that he was supposed to kill. He completely loses himself in the game, and that was the real fear at the time that was really pushed. Um, I mean, I would argue it wasn't until Dragonlance kind of pulled them out of the satanic panic,
Hmm.
um, because they Christianized D&D, and that's really what they did to pull it out. Plus, Frank Metzler wrote a brilliant article that really put that whole time period into its proper perspective, and kind of made even further distance against the panic. And the TSR never buckled. All right, and that's another really important thing here, and that's something that companies don't necessarily like. Companies buckle now under that same kind of pressure. They didn't back then.
Hmm.
All right, and that's what really saved the hobby, was the fact that, because if they buckled back in like 86 or whenever that was, 85, 86, when that was really hitting ahead,
Hmm.
um we might not have tabletop role playing games today, but they didn't buckle. And today we see corporations, and not just tabletop role playing corporations, but we see corporations today buckle under the Twitter pressure. And the Twitter pressure is a small microcosm of people that don't even buy your products for the most part.
Hmm.
And you're going to let them drive where your product is going. It just makes no sense. It's like, just, do like Japanese anime tells them to do. You know, run along, keep your Western ideas and nonsense away from us. I mean, Japan is pretty based in a lot of ways, especially when it's Western ideas trying to tread on their pastimes.
Hmm.
And they don't deal with this in anime, and there's been a few games developers in Japan that was like, screw you, go away with this nonsense. They don't care.
Yeah.
um and that oftentimes is the best solution, is to just tell them, screw off, go away. I don't want to deal with you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Binge Bear in chat here brings up a good point. By the way, thank you for the follow there, Binge Bear. It's one of those kind of hard lines that we all have to walk, is the notion that we like this, this idea that there are more players than ever out there
Mhm.
who could potentially be a part of your game. I know in the past it's been difficult to find dungeon masters, difficult to find people who are willing to play, or care to take the time to keep a regular gaming schedule, and more people than ever are now doing that. But at the same time, a lot of these people are trying to reenact what they're seeing on the internet, or what they're seeing in these like subreddits where people are telling gaming stories. They're essentially trying to relive someone else's fun instead of trying to find their own. And I think we really, rather than encouraging everyone to fit into this one mold, we need to encourage people, hey, find your own fun in this hobby. Because if you continue to try to, chase, to use the example, the biggest guy out there, what they do on Critical Role, if you as a dungeon master try to just, turn yourself into Matt Mercer, or turn yourself into one of the characters from the show, the best outcome is you do exactly what they did, and you already know how that ends because you watched that particular episode. The worst outcome is you fail, you feel like a failure, and you don't have fun. And either way, your fun's going to be diminished rather than if you just made your own decisions and kind of let your instincts guide you towards a different outcome, a different story, and then maybe you get your own RPG story that you can share on the internet that's unique to you, or you get your own moment that you're going to remember with your friends forever. It just, it takes taking a step back and kind of looking at this objectively in a lot of ways. But you're going to have a lot more fun if you just kind of, think for yourself and game for yourself. And I wish more people would pick up on that.
Yeah, again, it goes back to diversifying your gameplay. Um, you know, take a chance at GMing a game. That's another thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but yeah, every once in a while, change it up a little bit. Give your ask your DM if you're a player, hey, can I run a scenario next time? Just give me one little snippet that I can run and just get a feel for it. As an experienced dungeon master, you should be looking at your players and seeing, well, who can take up a session if I happen to be out, for whatever reason, especially like nowadays, right? You could be taken out by, the coup for a couple of days and just I can't run a session, but somebody else can. Yeah, change it up a little bit, and you'll be surprised where watching them run it, and you might pick up things from them. And then, all right, I'm back in the saddle again. The worst possible thing that could happen is you have a total revolt and they take all your players away from you. But if you're, I seriously doubt that happens very often. But if it does happen, you're just going to put together another group. It's just like when your character dies, right? You just re-roll a new character.
Yeah.
When your campaign comes to an end, you should be looking to see, well, my next campaign, I want it to be something very different. Even if it's with the same players, change up the genre that you're playing, change up certainly the game system that you're playing, and just give it another go at it with the same group of people, but just run it differently. And you'll find that you'll capture that lightning in the bottle, potentially a second time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a different track, but it's the same it's the same railroad, I suppose. The people who, especially around I think it was Wild Beyond the Witchlight and a little bit with Strixhaven, the people who were clapping their hands about, oh, we finally have a D&D game that basically lets you not play D&D. Again, there are game systems. If you don't want to swing a sword at something, there are game systems out there in the wild world of indie RPGs. Even some people who would not call themselves OSR who make games for you out there. You need to go find them.
Yeah. I mean, it's I recently did a video, a live stream actually talking about Strixhaven and you know, and then I go back to that. There was that BBC Three video with that one British female that was on there talking about, well, this is not your, D&D is not your bearded boys in your, mother's basement anymore. This game is now for us, and so on. And I think one of the issues with the modern 5e player is that they think they created this.
Mm-hmm.
They think that they're like they've innovated something. They've done something that's never occurred before. They think that the three pillars, of role playing, exploration, interaction, and combat, that old school games were only about combat. And that there was an exploration, and there was an interaction with with the world, with the environment, with the NPCs, with amongst the players and everything. It's like a total disconnect of what it's always been. It's always been inclusive. It's always been diverse.
Mm-hmm.
All right. My first party, my first group of players was our DM was born in the United States, but his family was from India. All right. We had a Jewish player. We had a Puerto Rican Italian player. We had me, a total mutt, Italian, Ukrainian, German, Irish. At one point, we had a Chinese player. All right. Born in the United States, but his family was from China. That was our group. I mean, the only thing we had in common were that we were all the same age and we were all males. All right. There just weren't that many female players back in the late 70s, early 80s on Long Island in Sayville, New York. I just, it was a very small community and just not a lot of players.
Yeah.
I mean, if there were 20 Dungeons and Dragons players, it's probably saying a lot. All right. And girls just weren't into it, at least not in that time period, not in our junior high school, environment. So it just wasn't there. So, but they didn't create diversity. It's always been there. They haven't created inclusion. It's always been there. They didn't create 5e did not introduce anything that wasn't in first edition Dungeons and Dragons or even OD&D. All right. It was always there. Look at Dave Arneson's group. Dave Arneson's group had at least 2, if not 3 women playing in it.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Gygax's play testers was, one of his daughters was a play tester, and mostly it was his family. So I know he has 2 daughters. I don't know both of them. I think one played more than the other. But there's always been women in Dungeons and Dragons with TSR, and prominent. Ann Meyer. Does anybody make better maps? I don't think so. I really don't. Margaret Weiss. You have a better person writing fiction that is at least Dungeons and Dragons adjacent. I don't think so. And there's always been women throughout. I can go into and it's going to slip my mind. Her name. Well, I know her last name's Wells, so I'm forgetting the first name. Some of the early modules were written by women.
Yeah.
So the idea that, this has been, all, Midwestern boys playing the game is not exactly accurate either. Nothing was introduced in, with 5e, and so when they try to say, well, it's different now. No, it's not. To use Barack Obama's, famous line, right? You didn't build that.
Right.
All right. I think Wizards of the Coast needs to, have that reminded to them, every once in a while. No, you didn't build that. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson built that. You're just writing on Dungeons and Dragons, the label.
Yeah.
All right. because if it didn't have that label, would this game system be where it's at? I don't think so. Not at all. All right. It's all about the label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What Hasbro bought when they bought Wizards of the Coast was the big thing was Magic the Gathering, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Magic the Gathering has been a massive cash cow for years and years at this point, and that does not look like it's going to change unless someone does something very stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But they also bought a D, an ampersand, and a D, which the majority of the population knows that means, oh, those nerdy guys are gonna get together and talk in funny voices, rolling math rocks. So that like you said, the name is the value there, and you can slap the name on any game system, and a certain percentage of the population is gonna buy it. You could slap it on, oh, what's a particularly bad game system? Like, I don't know. I don't want to talk crap about anyone right now. You could slap it on the worst game system that someone just kind of threw together in 15 minutes in their basement, and a certain percentage of the population would still buy it just because it has those letters on it. That doesn't mean anything. That's not how you get quality games. You get quality games by people putting good work in and really putting love and care and attention into their craft, and that's where the community of gamers that I want to play with is going to come from, is the people who are really excited about the cool things that Frog God's doing with their IPs, or I mention DCC all the time, but the how awesome the Deed die is and how it makes warriors super interesting, or the magic tables and the critical fumbles.
Right.
That's what I'm excited about. And if something in 5e doesn't excite you, if you want to play a game where everyone's just kind of sitting around talking, I got 15 people that I've run into on Twitter and a few that I've had on the show who've got a game they can sell you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much more out there, and I don't understand why people, especially young people, like you're young, experience, go out there and experience new things. Why limit yourself to just, and to me, what's really, detrimental, I think, is when you limit yourself to just one company. I don't mind so much if you're limiting yourself to one genre or one, even one game, as long as more than one company is making it, because they might take a different take on it, than someone, than that one publishing house will do with it. So it's, just don't limit yourself. I don't understand that desire to just focus on one thing.
Absolutely. So with all that said, and one thing I do want to mention is I've been watching your Strixhaven live stream, and I think that was that's a pretty good video. So everyone out there who hasn't seen DM Bloodworth's Strixhaven, I guess it's a review discussion, that live stream that you put out not too long ago, definitely give it a watch. But that aside, I do want to talk a little bit about the live streams you've been doing, and even the content you've been publishing. So are you looking to put out more RPG content as far as publishing on Drive-Thru in 2022?
Yes, I'm currently, I'm currently taking a look at producing something that's showing how the OSR can do some of the things that 5e is doing just better, and be much more interesting and compelling than and just using old rule sets. I mean, you can duplicate. I could duplicate Strixhaven in a better way in 10 minutes. All right, just in my head, 10 minutes. And I actually talked about it, I think, during that video too. I was like, Strixhaven, what I thought Strixhaven should have done, if you're doing a school of magic, first of all, everyone in there is an aspiring magic user.
Yep.
You know, a fighter wouldn't be able to walk in the door and become an initiate. That's just crazy, just crazy talk. You know, um, you know, everyone in there should be, in a school setting, which means that no one is a first level magic user.
Mhm.
All right, everyone's going in there as a zero level character, working their way towards becoming a first level magic user. And that's where I think you can go. You can go to second edition AD&D. All right, they have here, and I was actually getting ready to talk about it. You have the Complete Wizard's Handbook. All right, second edition, little splat book you can get for. I think I got it for like $20. All right, without having to get it from WotC. All right, so I won't give WotC money. I'd rather pay a little bit more on eBay to get the original than to give WotC money for something that they don't like,
Yeah.
that they despise. All right. And so, I mean, I could go through there and I can make an OSR version of Strixhaven, and it would be a true school like setting. And the players aren't going from, I mean, Strixhaven, which I have not read it, and I, disclose that fully in that video as well.
Mhm.
I haven't read it. I won't bother, but I know it takes you from level 1 to 10. What school environment is going to take you basically from apprentice to lord? All right, or the equivalent of that. A titled character class. Level 10 or 9. In AD&D terms, and that's not a school setting. That's an entire adventuring career.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, if you want to capture a school setting, then your characters should be starting at zero level.
Mhm.
All right, and they should be there for maybe 2 years, and you stretch it out and you could have all of those other interactions and non-combat interactions and all of that stuff, but you do much better with second edition AD&D for that purpose. Um, and you could do the same thing for any character class. I mean, what does it take to become a knight? All right, so you can go through that whole apprentice process, have your characters. I actually created an adventure and started characters out at age 8.
Mhm.
All right, 7, 8, and they had to go through a very ceremonial, again, a Nordic ceremonial process,
Yeah.
of becoming a man. All right, and I ran an adventure where they were 8 years old, then an adventure where they were 14 years old, and then an adventure where they were first level at 17 years old. All right, and now they were warriors going forward. That's the kind of experience that you should do. So that's something along the lines. I want to, I want to get to publishing something, something else for the OSR. Um, my most popular publication on the OSR was the OSR table safety tools. All right. And initially it was kind of tongue in cheek. And then I said to myself, you know what? I want to make this serious. I don't want to be overly sarcastic or tongue in cheek with this or mocking. I want this to be a true reflection of how I viewed my own gaming table back in the 1970s and 80s. And so as I started writing it, it came out to about 8 pages, and it's the true safety tools that we had. All right. And it wasn't that it was making the table safe for the players coming in. It was making the table safe for those playing there. Yeah, in other words, we weren't going to have any kind of an outside influence come in and taint what our purpose at the table was. Our purpose at the table was for playing a game, escapism, and just having a good time, and that's how I wrote that thing. Now, if I had made it 20 cents, because I asked him, I said, wait a second, this thing has sold like 350 copies. Now, sure, it was pay what you want, and most people took it for free, which was great, but I was like, well, aren't I supposed to get like a copper seller or bronze or silver or something like that? I think ultimately it would have been like silver seller. And I said, well, no, you got to charge 20 cents in order for it to be a silver seller. All right. At that level. So it's like, okay, now I know that for the future, but it's things like that I'd like to put out there. I'd like to put out some more adventures and make them virtually free now that I know to make them like 20 cents. So it gets some credit for it, being, rated out there. But yes, definitely. I do want to publish a few more things over the next, over the next year. I'm hoping to retire this year. So, and once I retire this year, then I'll be able to, really, really dedicate a lot of time to writing.
Mm-hmm. I think that was Tankar's strategy too.
Oh yeah, well,
he's retired now, but
yeah, he's retired now. Yeah. I know he does his podcast and he does his blog. I've never been a blogger.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I just don't like that. And podcasts, I don't like podcasts. I'd rather do video than a podcast. I don't even like listening to podcasts. I'd rather listen to a video, while I'm driving to work than listen to a podcast. I know that sounds stupid, but it's just I know that the video's going, even if I'm just listening to it. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather have that than listen to like a radio podcast kind of thing.
Yeah, I gotcha. That's why I added this portion of Rollin' Bones was, initially it was just an audio podcast, and I figured there are people out there who'd rather, I guess, see my face.
I guess, some people are visual learners, and like I said, it's like a mental thing, right? It's like, for me, it's like, if I know it's a video, I can listen to it, because I'm obviously not watching a video while I'm driving an hour and 20 minutes to work. But, I just like to know that there is a video there that I can then, after I've listened to it, go back and watch it, and you just get a different experience. So, to me, I just prefer that medium much better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as far as like live streams, are you looking to do more of those this year as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I am going to, one of my resolutions was that, I don't want to just talk about, from time to time, the OSR. Mm-hmm. I want to demonstrate the OSR, and I want other GMs and DMs out there to get their games out there. But not necessarily publish, because there's plenty of people that are publishing, but I mean, do recaps, talk about your games, talk about what you're running today, talk about what you hope to be running tomorrow. Just keep on going out there on Roll20, bombard Roll20 with a whole bunch of D&D BX games. Mm-hmm. All right. Change the algorithm. All right. Change the search engines on Roll20, because if you go on Roll20 and you advertise certain games, and if you advertise D&D, I mean, we still come across it every once in a while. Somebody will come in and totally ignore the fact that you were specific in saying, I'm running Holmes edition, and they'll come in and saying, well, I came up with this character from Volo's Guide. It's like, no, it's not. No, you're totally missing the point. But I'm playing, I want to play this bird thing. I don't even know what the heck they're called. No, it wasn't that. It was like a Kenku or something like that. It was like the parrot. Yeah, the Kenku.
Yep.
From Volo's Guide. And we're like, no, the DM was like, no, this is a Holmes edition. I said it for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So just keep on getting out there and Just say, I'm running AD&D First Edition. This is my game every single week. Every single week, I put up a recap video of our most recent session. So that's something that I want to do, continue doing that. I want to bring more OSR people. So like just before this, my most recent interview was with the RPG Pundit. All right. Massive video for me, a live stream for me. That was the format that he preferred too. So he likes doing live streams. So I was like, all right, great. We'll do a live stream. And, to have someone like that on my channel was awesome, because probably one of the biggest names that I've had on the channel as far as recognition amongst the OSR. He's the guy, I think, to have on there. I mean, yeah, if I could get a Matt Finch on there, or anyone related to, or DCC, those kind of people on there as well, that would be great too. And they might actually exceed that level, but for the most part, I mean, he just had James Raggy on his channel too. I mean, I couldn't get James Raggy on my channel, at least I don't think so. But he was able to. I talk to Venture Satanis, quite often, especially on like Twitter and stuff like that. I could probably invite Venture Satanis on, and he would come on, and he would be a great to do a one-on-one interview, because I don't think very many people have done that with him. So that's something that I want to do definitely in 2022 is have various people on. The next person I'm going to most likely do an interview with is Dungeons and Delvers David Guile, or have him on the channel, probably coming up within the week. I think I have to still sit down with him and hammer out a day and a time that we're going to do it, but it might even be next weekend that we're going to do that. And I know that game is a lot of fun, and he wants to specifically talk about the magic system, and because he thinks that's unique, and love to have him on for that. So we're definitely going to do that video. So yeah, every week or two, I'm looking to do a live stream, and I want to just keep on bringing out those OSR developers in order to do that. I had Chris Miller on a couple weeks ago that did Anchor, which he, that was a great interview as well. And his Kickstarter for his second edition of that game, looks phenomenal. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I have the PDF, but I'm waiting for I like to get the hard copy in my hand and then do another interview, about that, and just do the page through and breaking down the system as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So for all of that's coming up, all the great interviews and live streams you've done so far, and everything that you're looking to do in 2022, like you just mentioned, where can people find you?
All right. Well, they can find me on Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review on YouTube. That's the primary place. That's where I'm throwing most of my content. I also link that content onto Twitter. So at Bloodworth, that's BLUDDWOLF. So that's on Twitter, at Bloodworth on Twitter. And then on Facebook, I have a community called On-Screen. Oh my gosh, I just threw myself for a loop. On-Screen Gaming. So, and then in parentheses, OSG. So that's on there. I just use that as a place to sound off and put my my videos onto it. So on Facebook, I'm not very active, other than just uploading videos to that community. I am all over the place on Facebook and other communities and such. So I'm a moderator on Swords and Wizardry's Facebook group. on a whole slew of them, more places than I can be in. I also appear on Vincent the Evil DM's live stream. That's every Friday night. We've taken off the last 3 weeks because of the holidays, but we will be back this Friday, and that's called Unscripted Evil. And so the three of us, so basically three dungeon masters. Though I don't think Jeff, the co-host, dungeon masters that many games. He plays in Vincent's game, and we just talk about various things around the tabletop hobby. Usually taking questions from our subscribers, and then just spit those out the following week and kind of address those. And we try to find one issue to talk about in depth. So, and then I also appear on Legion of Myth quite often. When I get a chance, I can pop in there and just talk as as just a guest and chat. I think the longest live stream I did with them was like 6.5 hours, and my wife wanted to kill me because it was like 1:45. We were still going, and she was like, "Are you out of your mind?" So yeah, those can kind of go long, and I have to learn how to say, "Oh no, it's time to go," kind of thing. Midnight is like I think my wife's capacity.
Absolutely. And tell Vincent whenever he gets his work schedule figured out, if he's got a Monday night off. I've invited him on the show before and he couldn't work it out, but once his schedule kind of works out, he's welcome on here anytime.
Yeah, I'll let him know. And yeah, I mean, now he published the game a few years ago that was in any award-winning game. So I mean, like I'm nowhere near his publishing capacity and his track record there. So yeah, but he's really, really good, very knowledgeable as well. So yeah, I'll certainly let him know to come on.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully he can work that out on a Monday.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, DM Bloodworth, it's been great to have you on the show. I really appreciate you coming on. And I hope you have a great 2022. Mine's off to a pretty good start, and I hope yours is off to a good start as well, and continues to head the way that you hope. And if things go off the rails, hopefully it's in a good direction.
Yeah, it's sometimes off the rails is a real benefit. I mean, it's but yeah, I wish for you the same. Great luck with the channel. Hopefully you get a nice big bump here, and I will certainly share out your channel. I'll even link it to my channel so that you get some more exposure out there. And I will certainly tell Vincent to come on and direct whomever else that might want to pop on, send them your way as well.
Gotcha. Awesome. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, and like I said, it never expected anybody to reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'd like to interview you." So it's my first experience doing it, and I'm I tend to be much more humble than than many people might think, because I know sometimes I come off like kind of aggressive or certainly much more assertive and such. So for me it was a great honor.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you came on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, that is going to do it for tonight's episode of Rollin' Bones. This week we've got something different and long awaited coming this Saturday. I've got the IDW Games Batman the Animated Series Adventures board game. It's here. It's behind me somewhere. And I'm going to unbox that. It's the all-in pledge, so you guys will get to see everything that was promised for this campaign. I have, played around with it a little bit, looked at it. this is a great package, and I'm excited to talk about it. So that'll be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. right here, twitch.tv/RollinBonesRyan. We'll be doing that. Not sure what's going on next week, but in a couple weeks we are going to do the makeup interview with David Beatty to talk about Weird Frontiers. So that is still coming. He and I have that scheduled, and we will do it. There are some big things coming on the horizon that I can't quite talk about yet, but I will have more information for you guys moving forward about some possible changes coming to Rollin' Bones this year that I think will be good for everyone. Show's not going anywhere, but there are some things coming down the pipeline that I think will be awesome in 2022. So until then, guys, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I am so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see y'all next time.